So hi, welcome to our next session of Make It Your Own for Paws B. And in this session, we're going to be exploring Lesson 7 and Lesson 8 from Paws B as a pair. And just wanted to say a really warm welcome to Nicky Beattie, who is a really incredible trainer as well as teacher working in the Northwest. I wonder, Nicky, if we could start off just with you sharing a little bit about the context that you've been delivering Paws B.
Hi Faiy, thanks for having me today. Yes, so I teach Paws B in primary schools across the Northwest, predominantly in the Liverpool city region, but sometimes in East Lancashire as well. And I've been doing that since about 2018-19, so pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And what I find is that I'm either quite heavily involved in one or two schools over time, or then might just visit other schools and run Paws B maybe once or twice with them. And then they go off and develop themselves in the way that's right for them. So a nice variety of schools.
And I know that you've got one school at the moment that you're working with and have been for a longer period of time. Are you okay to share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It's a school in Liverpool, and it was the very first school in which I ever taught Paws B. So I offered a pilot to them initially, just after my training. And gosh, that must be 2018 now, 19. So I've had a great opportunity, even as an external teacher, to develop a school mindfulness lead role in a school in Liverpool, where I've been working for quite some time. I teach DOTS there and have done for maybe 4 years now, and also Paws B with year 3 there, and Dot Breathe with year 6. So over time, we've managed to roll out those 3 programs across the school. So every child there now has experience of at least one of the programs. And recently they've begun to train their own teachers as well. So I'm able to support them on that journey. We're also looking at the Pathways program that you've developed there, Faiy, as well. So it's lovely to see them now working towards a real sustainable model for themselves. Whether I continue to have involvement or not, really, it depends on how it goes for them. But the idea is that I can perhaps stand away and they'll be completely self-sufficient in the next few years. So that's lovely. It's lovely to see the development there.
Yeah, and I'm lucky enough to have actually been and visited Nicky as she's delivered DOT sessions in person at this school, and it was just fantastic. So, yeah, a really lovely school as well in terms of how they value looking at and exploring how to support the well-being of everybody in that setting. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, thanks for sharing that, Nicky. And I wondered then if we could have a little look at lessons 7 and 8 as a whole, just to talk about any sort of general sort of approaches or adaptations you make to offering these 2 lessons.
So lesson 7 and 8, looking at working with our amygdala. It really depends, Faiy. The adaptations I may make really depend on how well I know the school and children, and whether or not those children have experienced DOTS previously as well. That really can change, obviously not the content, not the intentions, but how I may deliver the messages and the content and the practices as well there. So I'm also careful to be really mindful around having that trauma sensitive lens around these lessons. The programs are designed with that in mind anyway, but here I feel very often I may need just to layer things up a little bit, scaffold things differently. I've also found that by bringing in this eye on kindfulness, mindful kindfulness as well, can really help to support the children, to support themselves around some of the things that may crop up whilst we're looking at working with difficulty, whilst we're looking at how that amygdala can be our best friend in supporting us in times of trickiness, and also might need a little bit of management from us as well, when a response might be the best approach. So there's quite a few elements that I may or may not bring in to support the learning here, depending on how well I know the children, whether I've worked with them before, and whether or not they've done the DOTS programs before as well.
Yeah,
That
fantastic.
makes sense.
Yeah, I'm just really curious actually, and I don't want to take us off on too much of a tangent here, but what's the difference? Are you able to give like a practical example of how it's different if children have done DOTS first before they do Paws B?
Well, they know about a dot, which is a mini dot, a micro dot, a dot dot. and how similar that is to the Pause B practice that we're developing in the Pause B program, that ability to pause, notice the body, and then resource ourselves with an anchor, whether it's the breath or something else, as a way to enable us to make skillful choices around what we might do next. So if they're already familiar with a dart, our practice in terms of Pause B can be a little bit more flexible. So I can offer up a little bit more choice for them to bring some of the practice they know from darts into the Pause B. So it's layering it up. And they might easily grasp some of the more abstract concepts as well, because they have that experience. I'm saying they, obviously every child's different. So I suppose the trick for me is not to assume that children who've previously done darts will somehow find Pause B more easy or more accessible, but also to notice that how their previous practice supports their further development and the embedding of what's offered up in Pause B. So for example, if we're doing a Fofbok in Pause B, it's something we've already talked about in dots. So even that thing Fofbok is a familiar thing for them. They'll know feet on floor, body on chair. And then in terms of perhaps bringing attention to the breath, if that's useful, they may begin to include things they've used in dots. And they'll also perhaps understand more readily that they can choose a different anchor as well if they wish to. So I hope that explains a little bit.
Yeah,
What I mean.
Yeah, you were talking about scaffolding before, and actually it sounds like dots scaffolds Pause B. So it gives them a way in, and maybe they grasp things quicker and potentially can go deeper with what you're doing in the sessions, but not necessarily. So yeah, I hear all of that. Yeah, thank you. So I wonder if we could come to lesson 7 specifically then, and if you wouldn't mind just sharing. I know you were saying you've got a particular way in with this lesson, so if you wouldn't mind sharing a bit about that.
I'm just laughing because we spoke about the cover slides, didn't we? The first slide up earlier on, and how pretty much always children just like leap on that slide. What's here today? Even though the lesson planning itself invites us to reflect on the previous week's have a go. But in this particular session, I find it really useful to focus on the cover slide where we have our 2 characters there, our caveman and the dog, and link it back into lesson 6 where we've discovered our insula and how useful that can be in helping us recognize emotions and feelings in ourselves and other people. So I'll use that as a kind of link into session 7, and let's be curious what's going on here. Let's look at our characters. What might they be feeling? What might be going on? So we're already talking about the fact that something's definitely going on here, and that this particular character looks like they're on the alert for something. So it leads into this idea that we've got a part of the brain that will help us in tricky moments. So we often have some fun with that as well. I'll also have my Weeble and Snow Globe as well, just to reinforce that, the wobbliness and the shaking up, the shaky mind and thoughts. We did find that moment of steadiness. I do that because I have my Weeble on my hand. That's my little sort of physical anchorance in the Weeble. So we can go back. Oh yeah, we did something that steadied us last time. Yeah, so don't get carried away on the opening slide. But I find this one in particular quite a rich one for the children. So that's how we find our way in. And I'll also talk about all creatures as well as our human person there. We talk about what sort of difficulties this cave person might encounter, what threats. But then we can also talk about animals as well, because we've got our animal friend there. And that might be, again, more accessible for some of our children to relate to as well, or want to share about. Yeah.
So then following the opening, we move into this exploration of how the amygdala affects us. And there's an example of a deer. And you were saying that sometimes you use that and sometimes you've got another clip that you use.
The clip around the deer as well, I think it depends where I am, to be fair, and the tech and the room and the setup and the screen. Sometimes that video is a little bit on the old side, although extremely useful, because in the deer and its encounter with the mountain lion, we can see the deer making those 3 responses, can't we? The freeze, the fight, the flight. And then the video then links that back into the human and how the human works. So again, I might make a decision around the tech because it is an old video. Some children can get a little bit alarmed about the thought that an animal's going to be attacked here. So I'll always pre-frame it with no animals get hurt in this video. But I've also got another clip, I think it's a BBC clip, of a tiger stalking a deer. It's big and bright and colourful, and I think the images might be a little bit more clear for some children as well. But just to give myself the choice around that as well. Yeah, the length of the clip as well, sometimes depending on the children I'm working with. The second clip I mentioned is slightly shorter. There's nothing wrong with the original one. It's absolutely fine. But again, sometimes knowing you can have that little extra choice can be helpful.
Is it all right if I just say here, Nicky, that we were talking before and we've got a new area on our website where in the hub where people are sharing resources that they use that are different to what's there in the notes and in the PowerPoint. And Nicky's really kindly said that she'd be happy to share the resources. And so we will be popping these up, the ones that she's referring to, because there are a few others coming up as well. So following the deer clip, or if you've used like another video clip, which you can do, of course, as Nicky's just been mentioning, you were saying, Nicky, that you have a particular way of taking the students then into watching clips that are around amygdala reactivity with fight, flight and freeze. Are you able to share about that?
Yes, of course. So we've got 3 clips to show. We've got one of a little boy in a supermarket who gets very frustrated that he can't have what he wants and goes into that fight mode, that aggression mode. Then there's another clip of a little girl singing and she freezes as part of that video. And then another clip of a little boy who's got some bird seed in his hand and he's being chased by the chickens who want the seed. So we've got the flight response there as well. I like to pre-frame this with children in a way that can support them, because there are potentially some big feelings that might be provoked here, which is normal. But what really the intention here is to notice how humans respond when that amygdala is switched on. And some of the language that children tend to use, my amygdala's been switched on this, and how that is so immediate sometimes that it will drive us, and then how we can support ourselves to begin to respond to that, noticing of that, and begin to make a choice around that. I'll offer that up initially as what we're going to be looking for and what we might spot, but I'll also encourage children to then bring to that what they already know about how humans can support themselves. So the secondary question in that is not necessarily what can we spot happening, but also when we spot what we spot, have a think about what you could offer up here as a way to support that little boy, that little girl. And we also notice what the adults do as well around the children. I have had on occasion in the past children who might get a little bit concerned about what's going on or a bit giggly about what's going on. And you've said yourself, Faiy, how important it is to name that and notice that's what's happening. There's no shame about perhaps noticing that we're getting a bit giggly if we see someone struggling with something. So all that happens here is acceptable here, is accepted here, because that's our response to it, and just noticing that. So not bringing in judgment or shame, but just being curious about how that crops up. So keeping an eye on kindness, how can we support that child? What do we know that might support that dad or that little boy? As well as noticing those moments when perhaps those people are tipped into that fight, flight, or freeze as well.
I think it's really just such a nice way into it to get them to think about what they would do or suggest to support the children that are in the clips. And it's not something I've thought about before. And I've been saying through these videos that I am learning new things. And isn't that wonderful that I am? Because I've been teaching Paws B for over 11 years now. But just really nice to think about that as a way in that supports both them individually and also gets them thinking about how they could offer that to others. I just think it's really lovely. Thank you for sharing it.
I do have some other alternatives as well for exploring that more fully in session 8 too. But in terms of session, I think I'm not sure there's anything else that I would say that I might do differently or additionally, other than just again noticing that in terms of practice, what children might bring from having experienced dots or not. But I'll always offer choice up when doing a FOF bark at this point in the game with Paws B around whether children might want to explore how that is standing and then sitting.
Mm.
And then the have a go as well, activity that's suggested for us at the end of 7 is to notice when things get tricky in the upcoming week. And I'll again put another layer in there about noticing how we can support ourselves at other times too. So rather than just focusing on, the really tricky stuff, also then maybe thinking, well, I've got a dance competition coming up, or a piano test, or a football match, whatever it is. So not necessarily just an after the fact thing. Does that make sense? Being a little bit more proactive.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
response react thing
Yeah.
as well.
And
Yeah.
I always think one of the things that I was sharing with you before is that I normalize the fact with children that the reaction is just going to happen anyway. And actually, that's the clever bit, because our bodies then show us how we are, how we're feeling, and that can give us a cue or a clue to choose to do something that helps us steady. It's that kind of Weeble sort of steady base that helps ground us in those moments. But I also always normalize that we don't always catch it.
Yeah.
If we've had it and it's just been very reactive, we can afterwards do a practice, choose to do a practice that then helps steady us.
That's really interesting as well. Again, for me to think about for future is that after the fact, steady myself. Again, it's that compassion bit for me, isn't it? That self, looking after myself afterwards.
So then into lesson 8 then.
Okay, so choosing your path. What I really noticed now, round about this point, 7 and 8, is that children are looking at how these 4 parts of the brain that we focus on are really working together. And that noticing that my amygdala is wanting to alert me to something, that's my insula that's noticed how that feels. So there's a real, I think it's one of those points in the program where things really start to come together here. I will offer up here, when we're reflecting on our past week and our have a goes and our tricky moments, I will tend to model out and offer up maybe an example of my own, just to give an idea of what the expectation is around this. I don't know what's cropped up for those children in the past week or what they've dealt with. So I kind of level something out like, there was a spider in my bath, or I noticed that somebody had parked and I couldn't get into school this morning, whatever it was. So not the worst thing that's ever happened to me in the last week. But so I introduce the session in that way in terms of reflection and have a go. In terms of Fafbok, again, I'll give choice up around that for the practice here. And I then link things right back to lesson 1. Children are very fond of some of those sporting videos that we've got in session 1, and the goalie's a particular favourite in many of the schools that I work in. So we'll relate back to our goalie as well, how they responded in preparation for a tricky moment. Again, just as another way of us thinking back about how we can resource ourselves around that.
Yeah, it's nice. It's lovely to have that referencing and bringing in things and examples that were there before, because it makes it, like you were saying just then about the parts of the brain, makes it all a bit more joined up for them. So
yeah, like we've seen this before in our very first lesson, and now we can see it in reference to what we're talking about today as well.
Yeah. So in terms of in this session, it goes in a bit deeper, doesn't it, on the sort of reacting, responding. So just this idea of exploring the fact that we automatically will react and we might choose to respond, and that there is sometimes where there might be a kind of more constructive way in which we're, of course, it's there to save our lives, the amygdala. So we emphasize that a bit, don't we, in part of it, or where that reaction might be useful or helpful for us. And I know you've got some different examples that you use here.
Yeah, I think it is taking that care around, not demonizing the reaction. And it's not, there is this way or that way. And so one of the things I tend to do, I don't know if you can see that here, is I'll lift that slide to support some of those conversations. There we go, around reacting and responding. Again, it's like a different way, maybe children, I tend to do this in 2s or 3s with children, either a reflection, what's happened previously, or as a response to any of the conversations we've just had around the start of the lesson. And they might draw on that. I don't know if you can see, I've got respond one way and react the other. they might want to draw on that and or write or just jot things down when talking with a partner or in a small group about the previous week's experiences or what they're currently noticing. It's a great way for me just again to have an ear and an eye on how things are landing, other than just hearing responses given verbally in the session. And that's something that can be kept as well, or popped in a tray, or even something almost like a little journal or diary for the next week maybe. I think there's a lot of stuff in the resources that maybe we can utilize in a different way. I tend not to create worksheets as such. We're well supported with worksheets if we want to use them. I don't often use them in their entirety in lessons, but I might pick little bits and pieces out or do things like this to support learning. So that's another, just a small thing that I tend to do. But then we do have those 3 images in this session, don't we? We have 2 footballers playing football together. We're invited to explore how the amygdala might react to that reactivity, and how aggression or that fight response might pop up, and how that can be managed. We can have that controlled sense of aggression there, which could be useful. And we've got a young person jumping out of the way of a car. Again, that amygdala being our best friend there in that situation, that reaction being absolutely super important for us. And then I think there's an image of some children quite clearly on the wrong side of their teacher in a classroom and just keeping their heads down, going into that freeze response. So looking at how useful that can be. I'll also support this idea of the usefulness of our amygdala. Again, is something that I've supported through the use of additional video clips as well. And it might just be me, but in my experience, those images often land more fully with older children, where we can get into some of the nuances of, we've got 2 footballers here, how could this spill over into violence and aggression? We've often seen that happening, sadly, haven't we, in professional football or whatever, and how might that be reined in? I think older children can perhaps have deeper conversations around those images. They're really useful for all our children, useful to have them there. But again, with younger children, or perhaps children with a different level of understanding, or even a different grasp of English, which sometimes, or very often can be a consideration for us, I'll use other videos to support that as well. So not instead of, but as a support. So I've got a short video of a tennis rally, which again shows that controlled aggression in sport. We can see the players both reacting and responding. There's a silly clip of a man dressed up as a snowman jumping out and surprising people, having a laugh and a joke, and noticing the responses of people to that as well. Gives a little bit of fun and lightness to it. And then there's a clip of Harry Potter and his chums playing Quidditch, which again can be a nice one for just having a longer, gentler look at the sorts of things that humans, when they're under pressure, and how that amygdala can be a good friend in terms of those responses that it can make. So they're just a few additional things that I might add as well to that.
Yeah, no, they sound fantastic. And these are the things that I was referring to earlier that we'll hopefully also have up so that you can have a look on the Make It Your Own area of the hub. Yeah, thank you. And so you were saying before about the fact that you don't use worksheets, and I also generally haven't really used worksheets, more with older students, but definitely not really with primary, for all sorts of reasons. And I think some of the things you've actually just mentioned there about what will work with different children, and I find just avoiding writing can be helpful with children who are this age range, because partly because I want this lesson to be where there isn't that feeling of pressure to write things down. So we just take that away and it's more a discussion based thing. But yeah, I support you with that. What I haven't done, which I really like that you've done, is pulling out those pictures, because it makes it more concrete what they're exploring there in terms of noticing the reaction and recognizing the option for a response.
I think in terms of the writing, again, some children love to write, some do write. Verbal responses are great, and again, we may have differences in terms of spoken language, whatever the languages we're using in the classroom. There might be children for whom English is not their mother language, or who are just learning English as well. So I think what the resources have are lots of ways in which we can encourage spoken responses, draw creative responses and writing responses as well. so that we can include everyone as best we can. But I'll often do little things like this, Faiy. Is that the sort of thing you were meaning when we're looking at what might be going on here for our characters in these images? So that's just one of the slides, I think. I think I've taken that from the, I think it's one of the slides, isn't it? And I'll use that as a, let's just have 2 minutes or 3 minutes, whatever it is. Let's just talk about what we've just explored. Have a look at the pictures, have a chat with your friend. What's going on here? What might happen next? What if we just get a reaction here, and then what might these people need? So allowing it to be a little bit more free, but also opportunities to draw on how can we support these people? How can they support themselves? How normal is it for us all to jump if we see a spider? And how often have we had this experience perhaps of being, can't get my finger on it, a little bit nervous about something? So again, naming and normalizing these things as part of our human experience and not demonizing the reaction, but also looking at how, if this person, again, might struggle to support themselves, how we might support them to support themselves, knowing what we know.
Yeah.
Lots of little hidden gems in the teacher notes.
And in the latter part of this session, there's a new practice that's introduced called petal practice. And then an exploration of what you can choose to do further to support yourself around what kindness can you offer yourself in terms of what you choose to do, whether it's seeking somebody out for a bit of a chat or a hug, or it's having your pet with you, or it's riding your bike, or whatever it would be, but lots of options so that it reaches all the children that you've got in the room. And it's important to think about that in terms of what their experiences might have been as well. Yeah, really. And I hope it's okay, but you were sharing before about the fact that you delivered Pawsby on World Book Day. Are you okay with sharing a little bit more about that?
Oh yeah, it was great. Absolutely adorable. Just what fun we have in schools. But yes, to teach a room full of Spider-Man and Iron Man and goodness knows what we had going on in there. Gruffalo and the tiger came to tea. But one poor Spidey, God bless him, had a full Spider-Man outfit on. He was able to breathe, Faiy, don't worry. But all he had were his eyes. Full Spider-Man. And we were talking about something and he put his hand up to, oh yes, Spidey, go on. And it was just like, and the thing was, I kind of like, as you do, but all his little chums went, yeah. They could understand him perfectly, but I didn't. But yeah, you just have to roll with it, don't you?
They always say, don't they, expect the unexpected, but it's on a World Book Day, you sort of expect it, but actually what you're having to deal with is very different. But lots of fun, always. Yeah. Thank you so much, Nicky, for sharing your experiences with us teaching.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
Really, thank you.